The first thing I want to say is with the greatest respect to the governor of Punjab province, is be very careful what you say. Bear in mind that your predecessor was assassinated because of the blasphemy law.
I wouldn't mind being assassinated for
allow me please to speak.
Yes.
Bear in mind that your predecessor was assassinated because of the blasphemy law. Bear in mind also that Cherie Raymond, when she tried to introduce an amendment to the law, had to go into hiding. Bear in mind too that there have been since 1990 at least 10 Pakistanis accused of blasphemy who have been killed while their cases were heard. And in 1997, a Lahore judge who acquitted a teenager of blasphemy was gunned down. We do not need any lessons from Pakistan, please, about laws about blasphemy. One of the great things that we have done in this country was to get rid of the discriminatory blasphemy law, which protected Christianity and no other religion. There was a great movement among the Muslim community in particular to extend blasphemy law to protect Islam against insult. I'm glad to say we got rid of it, and someone has mentioned international human rights law. The UN Human Rights Committee, which is the guardian of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, last July called for the repeal of laws about blasphemy and insult. Why is that? It is because the restrictions on free speech is not absolute, but the restrictions have to be very carefully limited to stirring up of violence and conduct likely to lead to violence. The position in the United States, which is not the same as the position in this country, is that because of the First Amendment in the United States, when Pastor Terry Jones burned the Quran, did it quite deliberately to stir up hatred against Islam, there was nothing in the United States law that could be done to prevent it. I find that absurd. I find the American position, the absolutist position, absurd. In Europe, we don't have that absolute position. We have a much more moderate position, which is we don't allow people to be locked up because of mere insult. All of us can put up with insult, surely, with assault on our dignity. But if there's any imminent threat of violence, we make quite sure that is criminalized, unlike the position today in the United States. Now, we had all this out, and no one's mentioned it so far, but Saeed will remember this. We had all this out with the previous Labour government when there was great concern that because of the invasion of Iraq, Muslims who didn't like the invasion of Iraq would vote Liberal Democrat and not Labour. And what happened? Charles Clarke, who was the Home Secretary, wrote to every mosque saying, if you will vote Labour, I promise you, you will get a law prohibiting insults against Islam. It was a most bad thing to do, in my view, to play politics with a minority in this sensitive issue. But they kept their promise. And when Labour was returned to office, they did introduce a law about insulting because of religion. And what happened? What happened was that the Christian right in particular, and not only right, were extremely concerned that Muslims were attempting to restrict their free speech. And the very divisive aspects of blasphemy law, which is that one person's belief is another person's blasphemy, came to the fore in the debates about that law. And I was one of those, with many across the House of Lords, that drew the teeth of that law by putting into it a requirement of specific intent of incitement to threatening violence and nothing less than that, and making sure that we protected freedom to insult. We did that because whereas if I attack someone because of their colour or race, I attack them because of what they were born. If I attack someone because of their religious practices or beliefs, clearly free speech is more implicated. And therefore it's very tricky if you do what they did in Pakistan. It's not just the fault of Pakistan, it's actually the fault of the British. Because it goes back to Lord Macaulay in the Indian Penal Code of 1860, who, in order to make sure that groups like this didn't quarrel with Hindus or Christians. He put into the Indian Penal Code, which is now part of the code of Pakistan and of Bangladesh and of Burma, he put in laws to deal with insult. And it is those laws which my friend Asma Jahangir in Lahore, which my friend Soni Swarajji in India, and the Human Rights Committee have been trying to get rid of, because you think that by banning insult you are doing something glorious for the Prophet, but you're not at all. The Prophet doesn't need criminal law to protect him. God doesn't need criminal law to protect him. Jesus doesn't need criminal law to protect him. You need to protect against violence, but you do not need to protect against insult. And my honest reply to this whole discussion is, if you think that any British government can get through in this House and the House of Commons a law that deals with religious insult, we tried all that in 2006, it overwhelmingly failed, and therefore what I beg you to do is to think more carefully about how the British Muslim community, not the Pakistani Muslim, but the British community should be placing itself. If you fall into the trap of appearing to be an intolerant rabble that wants to ban anything you don't like, you play into the hands of the Islamophobes and those who want to discriminate against Muslims. What you need to do is to place yourselves in a way that shows that you are a proper part of British society, that you respect the values of this society, provided that your own values are also respected. I loathe Islamophobia. I helped Nasir to fashion a law on religious discrimination. We fashioned a strong law about racial hatred in 1976, and I believe our legal framework now is perfectly satisfactory. But if you carry on in the way that the meeting has been so far, I think you play into the hands of your enemies, and that's not an intelligent thing to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.